10 years. That's how long we'd been married. A decade of shared meals, arguments over burnt toast, late-night road trips, and plans built one after the other like dominoes we never expected to fall. When Callista suggested a trip to Aspen to celebrate our anniversary, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was her way of telling me she wanted to fix things. The past year had been rocky. Distance crept in like a draft under a locked door. But people drift sometimes. I figured the mountains might bring us back together. Fresh snow. Crackling fires. Something real. I was wrong. That evening, we were seated at a rustic lodge with a panoramic view of the snow-covered pines. The table was dressed with white linen and golden candlelight. A bottle of red wine set open between us, half-finished. Callista had dressed in a dark green velvet dress, something elegant but effortless. Her laugh echoed a little too loud for the quiet room, especially when her cousin Jordan leaned in and whispered something. I caught the last word. Finally. They were both tipsy, cheeks flushed, but there was something else. Something rehearsed. I smiled, tried to hold on to the moment. The waiter placed a seared steak in front of me, rosemary dancing in the air. I just lifted my fork when Callista reached for her glass, swirled it lazily, and said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. By the way, she said, not even looking at me, I sold your cabin. My boyfriend needed the money. There was no build-up, no apology, no hesitation. She said it the way someone might say they'd changed the curtains. My fork stopped in midair. I looked up. I thought I had misheard her. But then Jordan snorted, wiping the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. He'll get over it, she muttered, trying not to laugh. I looked at the two of them. Calm. Still. Like they had planned this moment. Like this was their punchline to some inside joke. My stomach twisted. Not from shock. That had passed in the first few seconds. What settled in was colder. Sharper. A silence inside me so loud it blocked out every sound in the room. I watched her lean back in her chair, satisfied with the drama she had caused, probably expecting some kind of reaction, rage, begging, disbelief. Something to show her she'd won. But I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled. Not the kind you give when you're happy. No. This smile was colder than the ice clinking in her wine glass. That's funny, I said softly, reaching into the inside pocket of my coat. My fingers wrapped around a document I'd folded hours ago. Not because I expected this, but because I had stopped trusting her months before. Maybe even a year. Her eyes shifted to my hand as I pulled out the envelope. Slowly. Calmly. I didn't even rush the moment. I placed it gently on the table, right beside her water glass, and slid it across the wood toward her with 2 fingers. Jordan leaned over to peek. Still smiling, still tipsy. Until she saw what was inside. Deeds. Sale contracts. Authorization signatures. Callista's name. My name. Notarized. Dated. Final. She looked confused. What's that? She asked, her voice flat now. I leaned back in my chair, not even bothering to touch the steak anymore. I sold something too, I said simply. Callista reached out with a trembling hand. She pulled the document from the envelope and began to scan it. The blood drained from her face. You sold the account, she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. No, I corrected her, still smiling. I sold our joint investment account. The one I built for 10 years. The one you had access to, but never contributed to. You know the one, right? The account you borrowed against when you wanted that wellness retreat in Miami last spring. Jordan wasn't laughing anymore. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the leather booth. You can't do that, Callista said, but there wasn't much force behind it. I already did, I replied, my tone flat now. 3 days ago. Every dollar. Moved. Cashed. Redirected. It's done. Her face turned red, then pale, then red again. That's theft, she hissed. No, I said, eyes locked on hers. That's partnership. You know, the kind where one person does all the work and the other pretends to care. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. The silence that followed was so thick it swallowed the entire room. Even the waiter who had been approaching our table with a dessert menu took one look at us and turned back toward the kitchen. For a long moment, nobody said anything. I leaned forward just slightly, resting my elbows on the table, and studied the woman I once thought I'd grow old with. She looked nothing like the girl I met a decade ago. Or maybe she did, and I had just been too blind to see who she really was. Her lips parted again, probably to try and claw back some sort of power, but I cut her off. You sold my cabin, I said, my voice soft but controlled. Without my knowledge. Without my permission. And now you think you're still in control? I shook my head. You made your move, Callista. That was your mistake. Because now I get to make mine. Jordan finally found her voice. Look, this doesn't have to be ugly, eh? I raised my hand to stop her. You laughed, I said, my eyes never leaving Callista. When she told me what she did, you thought this was funny. Jordan looked away. I stood up. My chair scraped against the stone floor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even take the documents back. I left them right there on the table like a calling card. A warning. A line drawn in granite. Callista stared up at me, still holding the papers. Her hands shaking slightly now. We can talk about this, she finally said, her voice barely audible. No, I replied. We're done talking. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant. The cold aspen air hit me like a slap, but it was the kind of slap that wakes you up. I felt my breath freeze on impact, saw it cloud in front of me. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for her to follow, because I already knew she wouldn't. And that was the last moment I ever spent with her in a place we once called romantic. It wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral for everything we built, or thought we did. And the burial started with a single toast. A toast that burned everything. The drive down from Aspen was long and quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even think about where I was going, not at first. My hands just stayed on the wheel. I was locked on the winding road that cut through the mountains like a scar. Snowflakes started falling around me. Light at first, then thick and fast. But I didn't stop. I needed distance. From the lodge. From Callista. From everything I thought I understood about my life. It was strange how numb I felt. Like my body was operating on autopilot while my mind sat quietly in the passenger seat. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. Not yet. Those emotions were waiting somewhere ahead, biding their time. Right now, I was just hollow. I reached Denver close to midnight and pulled up outside Rory's place. He lived in an old brick building in the Five Points district, top floor, corner unit, the kind of space that smelled like espresso and ambition. I texted him before knocking, and the door opened almost immediately. Rory didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his dark eyes sharp, calculating, always reading between the lines. He'd been my closest friend since college, someone who understood things without needing them explained. He saw the way I looked, the silence in my face. He stepped aside and let me in. Spare rooms made up, he said as I walked past him. Whiskey's on the counter. I didn't go to the room. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass, and leaned against the island as the heat of the liquor moved through my chest. She sold the cabin, I said after a long silence. Rory raised an eyebrow. Wait, what? Sold it? Just like that. Said her boyfriend needed the money. He blinked. Wait, what boyfriend? I looked at him. Exactly. The words came slowly, like poison leaking from a wound. I told him everything. The dinner. The announcement. Jordan's laugh. The look on Callista's face when I slid the documents across the table. When I finished, Rory didn't speak right away. He walked over to the window, looked out at the dark city beyond, and folded his arms. That cabin was in your name, he said eventually. I know. She couldn't have sold it legally. She forged my signature. Rory turned back to face me. There was no shock on his face, just something colder. Focused. She's been planning this for a while, he said. You don't pull something like that overnight. She's been working on this behind your back. I nodded. Rory walked to his desk, picked up his laptop, and opened it. We're just getting started, he muttered, already typing. Tell me everything you still share. Accounts. Properties. Anything with both your names on it. It hit me then, not emotionally, but strategically. I had been living beside someone I thought I knew, while she had quietly built a plan to gut me from the inside out. The signs had been there. The sudden interest in our finances. The random trips. The coldness in her voice when she said, we're just in a rough patch. A rough patch, she called it. Meanwhile, she was funding a man I'd never met with money from my family's land. I sat across from Rory and began listing everything. The joint investment account. The Breckenridge condo. 2 vehicles. A safety deposit box. A wine membership. The art we collected over the years. Piece by piece, we laid it all out. And one by one, Rory began pulling up documents. She signed for the investment account as a joint owner? He asked. Yeah, 5 years ago. He tapped a few keys. You built that portfolio. She never added a cent. I know. He looked at me. We can use that. We worked until nearly 3 a.m. Rory pulling data. me remembering details I tried to forget. I showed him old emails, login information, the lease agreements I still had copies of in my email archive. The wine burned in my veins, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. At some point, I stopped seeing Callista's face as my wife. I started seeing her as a threat. Not emotional, not dramatic, just dangerous. Like a chess opponent who had made her move too early and assumed I wouldn't know how to respond. The next morning, Rory brewed strong coffee and handed me a plan. Literal bullet points on paper. Steps. Actions. A quiet strategy that would allow me to take back control of everything she thought she had won. You said you sold the investment account, he asked. I nodded. 3 days ago. Good. Then she's probably just realizing now that her safety net is gone. That money's been moved. All of it. He smiled faintly. Perfect. We use that panic. You're going to vanish from her world. No contact. No replies. No reaction. She's going to spiral, and we're going to watch her fall into the trap she set for you. He slid a new document across the table. What's this? I asked. An affidavit of ownership and investment contribution. We'll build your defense from the ground up. If this goes to court, we're going to make sure the record shows you built everything. She just signed the forms. I leaned back in my chair. The weight in my chest had shifted. Still heavy, but different now. Controlled. Focused. I didn't want revenge. Not the kind that comes with screaming matches or broken glass. I wanted truth. Exposure. For the world, and maybe even herself, to see exactly who she had become. And I wasn't going to say another word to her until I was ready. Later that day, I packed a small duffel and moved into the spare room. I didn't take much. Just clothes, my laptop, and a notebook. Everything else could wait. I needed to disappear for a while. Let her think I'd vanished. Let her wonder. I didn't answer her texts. I didn't return her calls. When she emailed asking where I was, I deleted it without reading past the first line. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if I was okay. She said, we need to talk. She said, why are you acting like this? She said, you're being dramatic. And with every message, every attempt to spin her betrayal into something I was supposed to accept, I felt the cold steel of my resolve harden. She'd sold something that didn't belong to her. And now I was going to take back what did. Not with noise, not with threats, but with silence and precision. Because sometimes, the most powerful goodbye is the one you don't say at all. It started with a shoebox. One of those dusty ones shoved to the back of a closet, filled with paperwork you never expect to matter again. Inside were deed copies, title transfer receipts, and a faded black and white photo of me and my grandfather standing in front of the cabin in Montana, smiling, proud, alive. That cabin wasn't just property. It was memory. My grandfather built it by hand. Every nail, every beam, he taught me how to swing a hammer on that porch. He taught me how to patch a roof, chop wood, and listen to silence without needing to fill it. And now it was gone. I sat on the floor of Rory's guest room, documents spread out around me like a crime scene. Except I wasn't the victim, I was the investigator. The cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. After my grandfather passed, it was willed directly to me. I never co-signed anything with Callista. I never gave her access. And yet, she sold it. Sold my inheritance. The signature on the title transfer looked like mine at first glance. Same looping R, same lean in the letters. But the more I stared at it, the more the details fell apart. Rory confirmed it. It's a forgery, he said, holding the paper under a desk lamp. A decent one, but not good enough. We sent copies to a handwriting analyst the next morning. The report came back in 2 days. Highly probable forgery. That gave us leverage. But what came next turned leverage into firepower. Rory had a contact, someone who worked in financial forensics. With a few nudges and the right keywords, we began tracking Callista's digital footprints. Bank transfers. Travel receipts. VPN routes. It took less than a week to locate a pattern. $42,000. That's how much she got from selling the cabin. A cash buyer, no mortgage trail. The funds were transferred into one of our joint savings accounts, but they didn't sit there long. Within 48 hours, they were wired to an account in Florida under the name Tyrese Bennett. I didn't recognize the name at first, but when I searched it, along with Callista's email address, the picture filled in fast. Tyrese was a personal trainer based out of Miami. He ran a boutique gym that hadn't turned a profit in years. His social media was flooded with motivational quotes, shirtless selfies, and awkward live streams where he begged followers to sign up for training sessions. And in the middle of all that glittering desperation, I found her. Callista. In a video clip from 6 weeks earlier, she was standing behind him, laughing, clapping, hyping him up like they were a team. She had a baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses on, but I knew her. I knew that laugh, that voice. She wasn't hiding. She just didn't think I'd ever be looking. There it was, the reason she sold the cabin. The boyfriend Jordan joked about at the dinner table. He was real, and he was broke. Rory stared at the screen over my shoulder. "You're bankrolling this guy's pipe dream," he muttered. "No," I said, voice low, steady. "Not anymore." I kept digging. At night, while Rory worked on spreadsheets for his clients, I sat at the dining table piecing together timelines. Her trips, the cabin sale, the investments she made in that gym. I followed the paper trail like a hunter in the woods, each clue more absurd than the last. She had sent money under different transaction notes: wellness services, consulting fee, vendor payout, all carefully worded to look like legitimate business expenses. She wasn't just cheating. She was laundering. With Rory's help, I compiled a dossier. Dates, screenshots, transfer confirmations, even a few blurry photos from Tyrese's Instagram showing her at events she had told me were girls-only yoga retreats. Every detail she lied about, every dollar she siphoned, every breadcrumb that led back to the man she thought I'd never find. One night, as I sat reviewing the documents again, Rory slid a manila envelope across the table. "Background check," he said. "On Tyrese. You're gonna want to sit down." I opened it. Tyrese had 2 prior arrests, one for fraud, one for identity theft. Both were sealed, but we knew enough people to get a summary. He'd scammed a woman out of her inheritance in 2015, promised her a business venture, disappeared with the cash. That woman had tried to press charges, but by the time police caught up, the money was gone and Tyrese had vanished. Charges dropped for insufficient evidence. Callista knew. She had to know. She wasn't stupid. She was calculating. Strategic. The woman I married was good with details, good with people, and better with lies than I ever gave her credit for. The worst part? She probably thought she was protecting him. Or maybe she thought she could control him. Maybe she was using me to control him. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an affair. It was a partnership. I wasn't dealing with a cheating spouse. I was dealing with a con team. A duo. She was the strategist, and he was the muscle. The smile. The sob story. She had helped him before. She'd helped him now. And unless I did something, they were going to walk away clean again. I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall. My hands trembled for the first time since Aspen. I thought about the nights she said she was working late. The weekends she claimed she needed space. All those mornings I'd made her coffee, kissed her forehead, told her to be safe, while she was stealing from me in broad daylight. Rory finally broke the silence. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I know what I have to do now." I gathered the documents and began making digital copies. I labeled everything, created folders, cross-referenced timestamps. I didn't care how long it took. I was going to dismantle whatever illusion she had built around herself. I started drafting a formal complaint for the real estate board. The forged title transfer was step 1. That would buy time. I also began compiling an identity theft report because I had a gut feeling we weren't done discovering just how far she'd gone. Rory suggested we keep a low profile. No direct accusations. Not yet. We needed to make sure we were ahead of them legally before we went on the offensive. So I nodded. I agreed. But inside me, something was changing. There's a moment when a man stops trying to salvage something and starts preparing to destroy it instead. I'd hit that point, and there was no coming back. Because once someone steals your past, your family's legacy, your trust, your name, you stop trying to reason with them. You start making sure they'll never be able to do it again. And that's when the real war begins. The first thing I did was freeze the joint accounts. Every last one of them. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a warning. I just logged in early that morning, coffee still warm in my hand, and locked it all down. With a few clicks, I stripped away her access to everything we once built together. She probably didn't even notice right away. That was the beauty of silence. Let her keep spinning on autopilot. Let her swipe and swipe until the card stops working in the middle of some high-end boutique. I wanted her to feel the slow burn of confusion, the helplessness Years of careful investment, slowly grown into something solid. She'd never paid attention to them, never asked what I was doing when I stayed up late analyzing market trends. She just signed when I told her to. She thought that gave her ownership. But 6 months ago, she'd granted me power of attorney for emergency purposes. She never bothered to revoke it. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she thought I'd never use it. She was wrong. I sold everything. Cashed out just before a downturn. The timing was almost poetic. Transferred the funds to a private trust under a new entity name. She couldn't trace it, not directly. It wasn't hidden. It was just out of reach. Like everything else I was about to take back. The condo in Breckenridge came next. Our second home, or so we called it. In truth, it was hers in function, mine in finance. She had decorated it like a showroom. White furniture, abstract paintings, expensive rugs that nobody was allowed to step on. It was the one place where I felt like a guest in my own life. I found the documents buried in a folder on my external drive. A quick glance at the notarized page reminded me her signature had granted me full control in case of a financial emergency. I didn't hesitate. I listed the property. Quietly. Discreetly. A private buyer made an offer within 3 days. She didn't even get a notice until the transaction was finalized. By then, the proceeds were already split, and her portion was tied up in legal review. She sent her first message that night. Callista, hey, just saw something weird. Why are the Breckenridge utilities in someone else's name? No greeting. No, how are you? No remorse. I didn't reply. A few hours later came another message. Callista, did you move money from the brokerage account? My card got declined at Whole Foods. Still no apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Then a third, angrier one. Callista, are you trying to punish me? Grow up, Liam. That one made me laugh out loud. She called me immature. After forging my signature. After selling my grandfather's cabin. After funneling money into a gym owned by a fraud with biceps for brains. She thought I was the one being petty? No, I wasn't being petty. I was being precise. She called the next morning. I watched the screen light up with her name. Didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. Her voice was steady, too steady. Like someone rehearsing a script. Liam, I don't know what's going on, but I think we should talk. Maybe we both made mistakes. Let's not throw everything away over a misunderstanding. I deleted the message without finishing it. The truth was, I'd spent most of our marriage giving her the benefit of the doubt. Explaining away red flags. Telling myself she was just stressed, tired, distant. But now that I saw her clearly, the illusion was broken. And it couldn't be put back together. The silence on my end seemed to rattle her. She started sending longer emails. First pretending to care. Then accusing. Then bargaining. One day, I opened a particularly dramatic one. Subject, you're being cruel. Body, you can't just ghost me. You can't shut down everything like this. I'm still your wife. You owe me the courtesy of a conversation. But that's the thing, there was nothing left to talk about. She had told me everything I needed to know when she sold the cabin and laughed about it with her cousin. That wasn't a mistake. That was a declaration. And now, I was responding in kind. Rory kept tabs on the fallout. He tracked the bounced transactions, the flagged accounts, the growing trail of digital confusion she left behind as she tried to understand how the world was unraveling around her. Her financial confidence was crumbling. She couldn't play the role of the calm, in-control wife anymore. Not when her cards didn't work and her backup plan in Miami wasn't answering her calls. It was slow, intentional, like pulling a thread and watching the entire fabric fall apart. Meanwhile, I moved into a small loft downtown. Minimalist. Clean. No memories in the walls. I bought a second-hand couch, a steel table, and a mattress that didn't creak under the weight of someone else's lies. It wasn't home, but it was peace. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake up dreading the sound of someone else's footsteps. I changed my number. Got a new bank. Filed a request to monitor my credit for identity theft. I made myself invisible to her. Not out of fear, but out of power. Let her wonder. Let her stew. Let her sit in the ruins of her own design and try to understand how it all fell apart so quickly. That was the irony she thought she could take from me without consequence. She thought I would scream, beg, cry. But I didn't do any of that. I didn't even curse her name. I just disappeared, took back what was mine, and left her with nothing but confusion. Because sometimes, the worst punishment isn't rage. It's indifference. And while she tried to piece together where I'd gone, who I'd spoken to, what I knew, I was already 10 steps ahead. With every quiet move I made, I reclaimed another part of myself that I hadn't even realized I'd lost. The money? That was one thing. But the silence? That was the real weapon. The knock came just after noon on a Thursday. I was in the kitchen of the loft, scraping burnt eggs out of a pan, still getting used to cooking only for myself. For a second, I thought it might be a delivery or maybe Rory stopping by. But something about the knock was different. 3 firm raps. Not hesitant. Not rushed. Just deliberate. I wiped my hands, walked over to the door, and opened it slowly. She stood there, shoulders squared, jaws set, eyes sharp. Not Callista. Someone else. A woman I'd never seen before, maybe in her late 30s. Dark hair tied back, plain jacket zipped to her throat, and a manila envelope clutched in her left hand like it was a weapon. "You don't know me," she said, before I could ask. "But I used to be married to Tyrese." That stopped me cold. My fingers tightened around the doorknob, and a dozen questions filled my head, but I said nothing. Just opened the door wider and stepped aside. She didn't even hesitate, walked right in like she belonged there. She looked around, gave a faint nod at the clean space, then turned to me and held up her phone. The screen lit up with photos, screenshots, documents, bank statements. Then she flipped open the envelope and laid more evidence on the counter like playing cards. "Your wife's doing to you what she and Tyrese did to me," she said. Word for word, move for move. Her name was Harper. And for the next hour, she laid it all out. She'd met Tyrese 6 years ago when he was trying to open a smoothie bar in Miami. He charmed her with big promises and big muscles. Said all he needed was a little financial support to get started. She was a nurse back then, worked long shifts, didn't have much, but she believed in him, gave him everything she could, cleared out savings, took out a small loan. He drained her dry. Then he brought Callista in first as a friend, then as business manager. Harper hadn't thought anything of it until one day, Tyrese changed the locks on the apartment, and Harper found out she wasn't just being left. She was being erased. "I couldn't prove anything," she said, voice flat. "They made it look like I was unstable, emotional. He told people I was obsessed with him." She backed it all up. "They made me feel like I was the problem." I leaned against the counter, watching her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't here for pity. There was steel in her voice. Strength built from scars. "I saw Callista in one of his new videos last month," she went on. I recognized the voice, the walk. And then I started seeing money transfers again. Names I didn't recognize. But yours came up in one of the filings, legal documents tied to a business account in Tampa. That's when I started digging. She pulled out a printout. It showed the name of a company I'd never heard of before, Tide Rise Wellness LLC. Registered under my name. Linked to my social security number. My address. I stared at the paper. "She used me to open this?" Harper nodded. "It's a front. They're laundering money through it. Mostly gym-related sales. Supplements. Memberships. But it's fake." I ran the numbers. The inventory doesn't match the deposits. And it's in your name, which means if the IRS ever gets involved, you're the one they're coming after. My mouth went dry. She wasn't just lying. She wasn't just cheating. She was setting me up. Harper crossed her arms, her eyes locking onto mine. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know before it's too late." I swallowed hard, nodded slowly, then gestured toward the tiny table by the window. She sat. I poured us both water. My hands were still trembling. "How did you survive it?" I asked. She let out a bitter laugh. "Barely. Moved in with my sister. Filed bankruptcy. Took years to rebuild my credit. The only thing that kept me sane was knowing someone else would eventually see them for what they were. That someone, apparently, was me." We talked for another hour. She handed over everything. USB drive, documents, a timeline she had mapped out. I promised to stay in touch, and when she left, I just stood at the door for a while, listening to the silence. Then I got to work. I sent everything Harper gave me to Rory. 30 minutes later, he called. "This is worse than we thought," he said. "She used your name to file for a small business grant. There's government money tied to this. If that warehouse address is flagged, you're looking at federal charges." I didn't speak. He continued, "You need to file for identity theft now. Not tomorrow. Now. Before this thing blows up in your face." I took a breath. Deep. Centered. Then I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll do it. And you'll need a lawyer," he added. "Not a regular one. A defense attorney. Someone who knows how to navigate federal investigations." "I'll find one," I said. "No," he replied. "I'll find one for you." I hung up and stood in the center of my loft, everything around me suddenly feeling smaller. Tighter. My life was becoming a noose, pulled tighter by the hands of someone I once loved. She'd taken my trust, my money, my cabin, and now she was trying to take my name. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about survival. I drove to a local precinct and filed the identity theft report myself. Took copies of everything. Sat with an officer for over an hour going through the forms. They took my statement. I handed over a copy of Harper's folder too. Then I contacted a federal attorney Rory recommended. A woman named Clarissa Vale. She was sharp, fast-talking, and didn't sugarcoat anything. "You're lucky," she said after our first call. "If Harper hadn't come forward, you might have found yourself facing real charges." "I'm not interested in lucky," I told her. "I want this done right." Clarissa began filing the paperwork immediately. She initiated the fraud alerts, contacted the IRS, and drafted a formal notice of dispute for any documents tied to Tiderise Wellness. Her tone never changed, professional, surgical. She didn't care about the drama. She only cared about the facts. And the facts were damning. That night, I got one more email from Callista. Subject: "We need to talk before this gets worse." Body: "I know you're upset. But freezing the accounts, selling the condo, this is getting childish. I think we're both making mistakes. Let's meet." I didn't respond. She didn't know yet. She didn't know Harper had come. That the fraud was exposed. That the company she built with Tyrese was now under review by a federal defense team. And I wasn't going to tell her. Let her keep writing her story. Because I was already writing the ending. And this time, she wouldn't be the one holding the pen. It was 6:47 a.m. when the first light crept through the blinds of my loft, drawing long lines across the floor like prison bars. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, but I didn't feel tired. My mind was too sharp, too full, too awake. Harper's visit had changed everything. No more playing defense. It was time to move. Fast. Smart. Quiet. I called Rory before the sun had fully risen. He answered on the first ring. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting across from Leo Kramer in a quiet corner booth at an out-of-the-way cafe near the edge of town. He was ex-military, sharp-eyed, all muscle and calculation. Wore a plain black jacket and a silver watch that ticked louder than the espresso machine behind the counter. Rory had called in a favor. Said Leo was the best man to handle what came next. Leo took one look at the folder I slid across the table and raised an eyebrow. "Your wife forged documents, created a shell company under your name, and funneled money into it with a man who has a fraud record?" I nodded. He nodded back. "All right then. Let's dismantle their world. No drama. No posturing. Just cold focus." Exactly what I needed. Leo started with digital forensics. Within 48 hours, he'd tracked down the formation documents for Tiderise Wellness LLC. They were filed through an online business service that required minimal verification. Just a name, a social security number, and a mailing address. All of it in my name. But the IP address used to create the documents? That came from a hotel in Miami. 2 days after Callista's so-called retreat. She didn't even try to hide it. That's what stunned me most. The arrogance. The belief that I'd never look closely, never dig, never fight back. Maybe she thought I'd be too hurt to see clearly. Maybe she was counting on me to fall apart. But I didn't fall. I calculated. Leo kept digging. Within a week, he uncovered 6 separate transfers from our joint account to Tiderise, each labeled under different business justifications. Marketing budget, equipment order, contractor fee. And each one landed squarely in a checking account belonging to Tyrese. Not a business account, a personal one. Leo traced the money trail further. Crypto wallets, third-party payment processors, dummy vendors created to mimic legitimate wellness brands. It was a full-scale laundering system. Sloppy in some places, surgical in others. The IRS had already flagged one of the transactions in an internal audit, though nothing had come down the pipeline yet. "If this explodes," Leo said during one late-night call, "you're going to be caught in the blast unless we get ahead of it." I had already filed the identity theft report. Clarissa, my attorney, had submitted preliminary notices to the IRS, local authorities, and even the Florida Secretary of State's office. She was building a firewall, one document at a time. But we needed more. We needed proof that Callista was behind it, not just suspicion. That's when Leo found the address. The warehouse. Listed on the business registration was a small industrial unit on the outskirts of Tampa. I flew down the next day. Alone. The place looked like every other building on the strip. Concrete. Dull. With a metal roll-up door and a cracked parking lot. But inside was silence. Dust. A few empty shelves, a stack of unopened boxes labeled Fitness Blend Protein, and a fold-out table with a laptop that hadn't been used in weeks. Leo was already there when I arrived. He'd picked the lock earlier and was walking me through the space like a detective at a crime scene. "This is where it all lands," he said, pointing at a corkboard with faded sticky notes. Fake invoices, shell vendors, inventory that never existed. In a drawer beneath the table, we found receipts. Names I recognized, including my own. They were printing labels with my name on them, shipping supplements and fitness gear as owner-approved products. All fake, all traceable. "She wanted me to take the fall," I said out loud. Leo didn't respond. He didn't need to. I took photos, gathered copies. We logged the evidence and handed everything to Clarissa. She smiled for the first time since we'd met. "This is exactly what I needed," she said. "Now we make it official." By the end of the week, she had filed formal identity theft charges, requested a forensic audit of the business, and submitted evidence to the IRS and Florida Bureau of Financial Investigations. The paper trail we had gathered was tight, solid. It screamed intent, fraud, conspiracy. My name was on everything, but now so were her fingerprints. And still, Callista kept texting. "Callista, I heard you were in Florida. What are you doing? Callista, we can fix this, Liam. I just made some bad decisions. Callista, please, let's meet. I'll explain everything." I stared at the screen. She was unraveling, but I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Clarissa. "She's going to try to talk her way out," I told her. "She'll have her chance," Clarissa replied. In court. 2 days later, we got confirmation. The IRS had launched a formal inquiry into Tide Rise Wellness. They called me in for a statement. Clarissa handled everything. By the time we were done, I was listed as a cooperating victim in a federal fraud case. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was preparing to press charges. Tyrese, still unaware of how close the storm was, posted a video on social media the next morning. He was standing in the gym, sweaty, smiling, arms wide like he was about to deliver a sermon. I watched him talk about loyalty and vision while standing in the ruins of what was soon to be his downfall. And in the background, I saw her, Callista, off to the side, barely visible, wearing sunglasses indoors, like always. I didn't feel pain when I saw her. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was quiet, the kind of silence that comes after a long storm. The kind that tells you the sky's about to clear, and what's left standing after the wind dies down is what really matters. I turned off the video and opened my laptop. Leo had sent the final piece of the puzzle. A timestamped login, the business bank account, IP matched to her apartment, and the transaction memo, reimbursement for consultation, CL, her initials. It was over. I knew it. Rory knew it. Leo knew it. All that was left was for her to know it too. I sent the evidence package to Clarissa. She called back within the hour. "This is it," she said. "We've got her." And for the first time in months, I exhaled. Not in relief, but in preparation. Because the next time I saw Callista, it wouldn't be at a table, or a dinner, or a therapy session. It would be in court. And this time, the setup wouldn't be hers. It would be mine. The envelope was thick when it landed in my mailbox. Cream-colored. Heavy. Official. The kind of envelope that doesn't bring birthday cards or thank you notes. Clarissa had warned me I might get one, but seeing it with my name stamped in bold across the front still sent a chill through me. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and just stared at it for a moment. It wasn't a surprise, but it still felt like a punch. Inside was a civil lawsuit, filed by Callista. She was suing me for misappropriation of marital funds. According to the paperwork, I had intentionally withdrawn and concealed assets from our shared accounts, leaving her financially stranded and emotionally traumatized. The words jumped off the page like spit in my face. She was trying to flip the script. To make me the villain in the story, she wrote with her lies and forged documents. I sat back, the paper still in my hands, trying to understand the logic behind it. She had stolen from me, betrayed me, and nearly got me federally indicted. And now she was accusing me of financial abuse. "She's cornered," she said immediately. "This is desperation disguised as offense. She's trying to get ahead of the charges?" "Exactly. If she can frame you as the aggressor, she might negotiate leniency, or at least stall the investigation." That settled something deep inside me. She was scared. She knew what was coming. In this lawsuit, it was her way of trying to throw sand in my eyes before the final blow landed. I want to counter, I said. We will, Clarissa replied. But first, we prepare. And that's what we did. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Clarissa and Rory to gather everything. Every bank statement, every email, every signed document. Leo was relentless. He found old chat logs, VPN records, and flagged IP addresses linked to Callista's devices. He mapped out her digital trail like a forensic artist sketching a suspect's face. But the most damning piece came from Harper. She had kept everything. Voice memos from Tyrese, screenshots of group chats where Callista coached him on what to say, even copies of a Google Doc where they laid out a target profile, descriptions of financially stable partners they could exploit. My name was at the top of one of the lists. Liam D., it read. Owns cabin. Multiple investment accounts. Passive. Predictable. Too nice. That last word, nice, nearly made me laugh. Because nice was gone now. Clarissa compiled everything into what she called the betrayal files. It was a binder, 3 inches thick, tabbed by date, category, and relevance. Every forged document, every unauthorized transaction, every digital breadcrumb that led back to her and Tyrese. You know what the best part is? Clarissa said during our final prep meeting. She's going to walk into that courtroom thinking this is about a marriage. I raised an eyebrow. And it's not. No, she said. It's about a conspiracy. The day of the hearing, I arrived in a dark suit. Nothing flashy. Just clean and silent. Rory stood beside me, calm and unreadable. Clarissa was already inside, setting up the exhibits. The courtroom smelled like paper and dust. Rows of wooden benches. A judge's bench that looked like it had seen decades of lies. Callista arrived 10 minutes late. She walked in like she was the victim in a film. Hair pulled into a perfect bun, white blouse tucked into a skirt too formal for the occasion. She glanced at me, smiled faintly. The kind of smile that's meant to disarm, as if we were still something that could be fixed. I didn't return it. Her lawyer looked younger than her. Nervous. Kept checking his notes, glancing my way like he was hoping I'd slip and confirm something with a twitch of my face. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The bailiff called the case. And then it began. Her attorney started with the expected, claiming financial abandonment, emotional hardship, and the classic phrase, intent to conceal. I listened without blinking. Let him paint his picture. Let him try to cast shadows where the truth stood tall. Then it was our turn. Clarissa stood slowly. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just clarity. She presented the forged cabin sale first. Laid out the deed, my original signature, and the expert testimony on the forgery. Then she walked the judge through the financials, the shell company, the withdrawals, the digital fingerprints. She introduced Harper's affidavit, then Leo's, then mine. For every accusation Callista had made, we presented a wall of evidence that didn't just defend me, it exposed her. The courtroom stayed quiet. Even Callista's lawyer looked like he was reconsidering his life choices. When it came time for Callista to take the stand, she hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She tried to cry, said she was confused, that she trusted the wrong people, that Tyrese had misled her, that she didn't know what she was signing. But Clarissa was ready. She pulled out the group chat logs, the draft messages, the audio files, and when she showed the target list, with my name at the top, the silence in the room shifted. It wasn't sympathy anymore. It was realization, disgust. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked at Callista, then at her lawyer. I find the plaintiff's claims not only unsubstantiated, he said slowly, but intentionally misleading. This case is dismissed. With prejudice. Callista's mouth opened. But he wasn't done. Additionally, given the evidence presented today, I am referring this matter to the state attorney's office and the Department of Revenue for further investigation. Bailiff, please escort Ms. Duval to the holding area. She is not to leave the premises until interviewed by the attending agents. It happened fast. 2 plainclothes agents entered from the rear of the courtroom. One approached Callista gently. The other reached into his coat and handed her a document. Her hands shook as she read it. The color drained from her face. It was a formal notice. Charges, wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud. She turned to me, her eyes wide, lips trembling. Liam, please, don't let them. But I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. She was still calling my name as they walked her out. 2 days later, Tyrese was arrested outside a strip mall gym in Miami. He went quietly. No speech. No video this time. And just like that, the empire they'd built on lies and fake promises crumbled. Not with fire. Not with violence. But with the one thing they never expected. Evidence. It should have felt like victory. When the agents led Callista out of that courtroom, her hands trembling, her voice stammering some version of please that had lost all weight, I thought I'd feel a sense of closure. Justice. Relief. But instead, what settled over me was something heavier. Not grief. Not guilt. Just a strange stillness. Like standing in a house after a fire, surrounded by ashes you didn't set, but still have to clean up. Rory met me outside the courthouse. He didn't say much, just clapped a hand on my shoulder and nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. Clarissa walked out a few minutes later, binder in hand, her expression unreadable. She'll be held for questioning, she said. Depending on how honest she is, we'll know whether this stays state level or moves federal. My bet. They're going to make an example out of both of them. I raised an eyebrow. Both. Tyrese is already in custody, she replied. Florida Bureau arrested him this morning. We filed the supporting documentation to link him directly to the transactions under Tiderise. And between Harper's affidavit, Leo's data, and the shell company trail, it's not a question of if, it's when. I didn't smile. I just nodded again. It wasn't over. Not really. Because while the courtroom was behind me, the consequences weren't. A few days later, Clarissa called me with an update. Remember that business grant? She asked. The one they filed in my name? Yep. Turns out the state approved a partial disbursement. $18,000. Which means, I'm liable, I finished. She paused. Technically, yes. Until the court finalizes the fraud claim and shifts responsibility to her. But that process can take months. Maybe a year. I sank into the couch in the loft, staring at the bare wall across from me. I'd spent so long exposing the truth, proving she'd stolen from me, lied to me, used me. But that didn't erase the damage. It didn't cancel the debt. How much? I asked. $14,200, she said. That's your share under joint marital liability. Because you were still legally married when the form was signed. I closed my eyes. Of course. There's always something left behind. Always a piece of the fire that keeps burning long after the smoke clears. I'll pay it, I said quietly. Liam, we can contest it. No, I said. Let it be the last thing I pay for her. Ever. There was a silence on the line. Then she exhaled. All right. I'll send the transfer details. After I hung up, I sat there in the quiet for a long time. $14,000. It wasn't just money. It was the final price of my silence. My trust. My 10 years of looking the other way while something rotten grew right in front of me. I transferred the money that night. No hesitation. It felt like pulling a splinter from my soul. Later, I met Rory for drinks. We sat at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. Just two men who'd seen too much and said too little. He didn't toast to justice or say told you so. He just listened. You're free now, he said. I shook my head. Not yet, but I'm getting close. The next morning, Leo called. I thought you might want this, he said. He sent over a compiled report, final logs, court filings, the full list of transactions from Tiderise under both Tyrese's and Callista's names. The last entry on the list? A payment labeled Cabin Flood Claim Reimbursement, CD. What is this? I asked. She filed an insurance claim after the cabin sale, Leo said. Claimed it had been damaged during a storm. The cabin wasn't damaged, Liam. She flooded it intentionally. Probably to make the buyer drop the price or to cover something up. I stared at the report. She vandalized my grandfather's cabin? Leo's voice lowered. She desecrated it. It was the first time I felt true anger in weeks. Not the cold kind. Not the calculating kind. This was raw. Ugly. The cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was family. Legacy. And she destroyed it like it was disposable. I thought of that old black and white photo of me and my grandfather. Us standing in front of that porch, two proud smiles, a whole future ahead. And now, that future had been sold, flooded, claimed, and erased. I didn't cry, but I came close. I spent the rest of the week wrapping things up, closing accounts, canceling shared services, returning legal documents to Clarissa for archiving. With every box checked, I felt something loosen in my chest. Bit by bit, I was untying the knot she'd tied around my life. Then, one morning, I woke up and realized there was nothing left of her here. No photographs. No clothes. No lingering scent of her shampoo in the bathroom. She was gone. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Except the debt. The debt had stayed, but I didn't resent it anymore. It was a scar now. A mark of survival. Of clarity. Leo sent me one last message before signing off. This is the part they never talk about, he said. The scar tissue. He was right. People love revenge stories. The drama. The downfall. But nobody talks about what happens after. The silence. The paperwork. The therapy. The rebuilding. The small, slow moments of putting yourself back together piece by jagged piece. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window. It was raining, but I didn't feel cold. I felt clean. Harper called that evening, just to check in. She said she'd heard about the court outcome, about the charges. She sounded steadier than before, stronger, like someone who'd been through fire and learned how to live with the burns. They'll go down for this, she said. Eventually. I nodded. They already have. There was a pause. Then she asked, softly, so what are you going to do next? I looked around the loft. The clean counters. The empty walls. The life I had pressed reset on. I'm going to start over, I said. Simple as that. Not in a movie montage kind of way. Not with grand speeches or perfect endings. Just quietly. Honestly. One step at a time. Because I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. And I was finally ready to find it. You think once the fire is out, you can breathe again. That after the final blow, the last courtroom appearance, the evidence, the cold click of justice, there's nothing left to burn. But that's not always true. Because some debts don't go away. Some stay, wrapped in fine print and forgotten clauses, just waiting to remind you that even freedom has a price tag. It was a letter this time. Plain envelope. No warning. No apology. Just my name printed at the top and a polite request for payment at the bottom. I sat at the kitchen table holding it between my fingers like it might bite. $14,200. I'd already known about the amount. Clarissa had explained it clearly after the courtroom chaos faded. It came from a refinancing document I signed 3 years ago, back when I was still trying to save a marriage that had already quietly packed its bags. Callista had slipped it in during a long stack of papers. We were consolidating debt, she said, lowering interest rates, making things easier. I hadn't read every word. That was my mistake. Buried deep inside was a clause linking me, jointly and legally, to a business loan. One that was now tied to the fraudulent company Tiderise Wellness. And even though she was the one who opened the account, used the funds, and forged the operations behind it, the debt was still real. And because we were married when it was created, I was liable. The legal process would shift the blame in time. The fraud report, the testimony, the criminal investigation, it would all work in my favor eventually. But eventually wasn't now. And the creditors? They didn't care who faked what. They just wanted their money. I ran my thumb across the edge of the letter and looked around the room. The loft was quiet, as always. Sparse, clean, small. It had no memories in the walls, which I liked. But that morning, it felt tighter. Like the walls were leaning in again. Like I was being reminded that even after all I'd done, the exposure, the silence, the plan, there were still remnants of her tangled in my life. I thought about fighting it, about dragging it into another legal battle. But something inside me said no. No more courtrooms. No more dragging this out. I was done bleeding for her decisions. So I paid it. Quietly. Without ceremony. I walked to the bank, withdrew from my personal savings, and wired the money. The teller gave me a printed receipt. I folded it and slipped it into a drawer without reading it twice. That was the last thread. The last dollar. The final consequence of a marriage built on lies. Afterward, I walked to the park down the street. It was a cold day, gray sky, scattered leaves, the kind of afternoon that kept most people indoors. But I needed to be outside, to feel the wind against my face, to remind myself I was still here, still standing. I sat on a bench overlooking a small man-made pond and let my thoughts settle. They didn't race like they used to. No more what-ifs. No more flashes of Callista's voice echoing in my ears. Just space. Silence. Scar tissue. Leo had been right. Nobody talks about this part. The part where you're free, but still feel a little broken. The part where you win, but still have to pay. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the last messages I had saved from Clarissa. Most were logistics, case updates, file transfers, closing memos. But the last one was different. Clarissa, You handled this with more grace than most people would. You walked away without destroying yourself to destroy her. That's rare. I hadn't replied, but I'd read that line over and over. Because she was right. And also wrong. I didn't walk away unscathed. I was still rebuilding from ashes. But I'd chosen not to be like Callista. I hadn't forged anything. I hadn't used someone else's name, heart, or credit score to fill a hole inside me. I'd responded with truth. With facts. With quiet resolve. And that, to me, meant more than revenge ever could. After sitting there a while, I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd carried since the day I left Aspen. Inside were notes from the early days of unraveling everything. Account numbers. Password resets. Legal steps. But further back, buried behind the battle plans, were scribbles of something different. Ideas for a new beginning. Dreams I'd paused. Projects I'd buried. Before Callista, I used to sketch ideas for a small retreat center. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet place tucked in the trees, somewhere people could disconnect, breathe, find peace. I flipped to the page where I'd drawn a rough floor plan. Cabin-style rooms. A shared kitchen. Walking trails. Fire pits under the stars. I hadn't looked at that page in years. But now? Now it didn't feel impossible anymore. A few days later, I drove to the edge of the city and met with a realtor. I told her I was looking for land. Somewhere remote. With trees. With silence. She showed me 3 properties. The first 2 were beautiful, but the third? It felt, right? It was just a clearing, really. A few acres tucked behind a long stretch of pine trees. A creek ran along the edge. No structures. Just earth. But when I stepped out of the car and stood there, breathing in the cold mountain air, something inside me settled. It wasn't the old cabin. I'd never get that back. But this? This could be mine. Truly mine. I put in an offer. A week later, it was accepted. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Rory. Not Leo. Not even Harper, who had become a quiet presence in my life. Someone I met for coffee every few weeks, always talking about anything except the past. But the day I signed the final paperwork, I sent her a photo of the land. No caption. Just the image. She replied with a single word. Freedom. And that's what it felt like. Not escape. Not revenge. But peace. I visited the land every weekend, sometimes just to walk the edge of the creek, sometimes to sit on a folding chair with a thermos of coffee and listen to the wind. I started sketching again. Plans. Possibilities. I didn't know how long it would take to build something, or even if I would. But the idea lived again, and that was enough. One night, as I sat by the water under a sky full of stars, I took out that notebook again. I flipped to a blank page and wrote something I hadn't dared to say aloud. She took the past, but she couldn't take the future. That's mine. The cabin was gone. The one my grandfather built with his bare hands, the one where I learned how to split firewood, where we played cards by lantern light when storms knocked out the power. Callista had taken it, sold it, flooded it, and buried it under a claim. And as much as I wanted to believe I could one day get it back, I knew deep down it was never coming home. But not everything has to. Some things are meant to stay in the past, anchored to who we were before the fire came through. I stood on the porch of the new place, a quiet stretch of forest near Flathead Lake. It was still unfinished. The siding wasn't painted yet, and there was a stack of cedar planks leaning against the east wall waiting to become a deck. But it was mine. Completely. Not co-signed, not borrowed, not attached to someone else's name or expectations. Mine. There was no grand celebration when I bought it. No Instagram post. No champagne pop. Just a signed deed, a quiet exhale, and a long drive through winding roads that didn't lead back to anything but peace. Most mornings, I woke up before sunrise and sat on the unfinished steps with a mug of black coffee. Just me and the sound of birds figuring out the day. No alarms. No schedules. No one asking for anything. The quiet didn't feel empty, it felt earned. Harper lived 2 towns over now. After the trials and courtrooms and long months of sorting through the aftermath, she decided she needed space, too. Not away from me, but away from the memory of what had happened. We never tried to force something romantic between us. That wasn't what we needed. What we shared was something different. A bond forged in betrayal. In survival. In understanding without explanation. We met up sometimes. Usually at the local cafe that served thick toast and terrible D. The silence said enough. One day, she brought a rescue dog, some kind of shepherd mix with a crooked tail and soft eyes. I sat on the ground while he sniffed me like I was a puzzle. You should get one, she said, sipping her tea. Maybe, I replied, rubbing the dog's ears. Dogs are honest, she added. They're either happy to see you or they're not. No pretending. That made me laugh. And it stuck with me. Later that week, I adopted a black lab mix from the shelter. They called him Diesel. He was all legs and tongue and had a bark too big for his skinny frame. He followed me everywhere, as if he was afraid I might vanish if he blinked. He liked to nap on my boots and howl at distant owls like they owed him money. He made the cabin feel full. I started writing again. Not stories. Not letters. Just thoughts. I filled notebooks with memories I didn't want to lose. Good ones, like the first time I caught a fish with Grandpa or the way the cabin used to smell in winter. I didn't write about Callista. Not directly. But she showed up anyway in the quiet between sentences and the things I was learning to let go. One evening, I checked the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive and found a letter with no return address. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Thick, expensive. The handwriting was neat, unmistakably hers. You always thought you were smarter, but I was just faster. That was it. No apology. No regret. No ownership. Just a line that stank of pride and denial. Like she still believed she'd won something. I read it twice. Then once more, slower. And then I smiled. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. There was a time that letter would have ruined my whole day. Would have sent me into a spiral of anger or doubt. But now, it was just a whisper from a world I no longer lived in. A small reminder of who she was and who I no longer had to be. I didn't reply. I burned it. Right there in the fire pit out back. Diesel sat beside me, watching the flames crackle and curl the paper into ash. Then I stood up, stretched, and walked inside. A few days later, I got a message from Rory. Just checking in. He said he'd heard through one of his legal contacts that Tyrese had taken a plea deal. 5 years minimum. Callista's trial was still pending. There were new charges. Something about misusing federal grant money and falsifying identity records across state lines. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. That part of my life was over. And I wasn't going to keep dragging its ghost into my present. I spent that weekend building the deck out back. It was slow work, measuring, leveling, hammering boards while Diesel chased bugs and barked at passing clouds. But it felt good. Honest. Every nail was a little reclaiming. Every board a little reminder that I was building something real now. Something no one could forge or flood or take away. That Sunday, Harper stopped by. She brought a peach pie and 2 mugs from the cafe. We sat on the half-finished deck and watched the sun sink below the trees, the sky burning soft orange and pale purple. She pointed at the horizon. You know what I like about this place? She asked. What's that? It's quiet, she said. But not empty. That summed it up better than I ever could. We didn't say much after that. Just let the quiet stretch between us like a bridge. Later, after she left, I sat by the fire pit again. Diesel curled up at my feet. The stars came out one by one, soft and slow, like they were in no rush to impress. And I finally said it out loud. You were fast, I whispered to the night, to the memory of Callista. But I'm free. And that, I realized, was the difference. She ran from truth, hid behind lies, cut corners and build illusions and moved through life like she was always one step from exposure. She might have been faster, louder, sharper with her tongue, but I was whole now. And wholeness isn't about speed. It's about stillness, about choosing peace over war, integrity over spectacle, healing over revenge. The cabin may have been sold, flooded, and lost, but the one in my mind, the one built from memory, forged in fire, and rebuilt in silence, still stood. And this one? No one would ever touch again.